Coming up on Dr. Kiki's Science Hour, we're talking about biomimicry and materials with Dr. Christopher Viney from UC Merced. That's up next on Dr. Kiki's Science Hour.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Dr. Kiki's Science Hour is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Dr. Kiki's Science Hour, episode 71, with Dr. Kiki Sanford, recorded on Thursday, November 4th, 2010. It's all material. 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 Welcome, everyone, to another episode. It's episode 71 of Dr. Kiki's Science Hour. I'm Dr. Kiki, and it is time to get dirty. We're going to dig in to some really fun stuff today. We're going to dig into materials. Why materials? Well, materials make up everything that we use in the world, right? But there are some really interesting aspects to designing materials and creating new materials that we take from nature. So today we're talking about biomaterials, or to put it a little more clearly, biomimicry of materials. And with me today is Dr. Christopher Viney from UC Merced. He is the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education and the Professor of Engineering at UC Merced. He's one of the founding faculty of the university, actually. His focus is biomolecular materials and physical science and engineering of polymers and liquid crystals. His research gained popular interest about 5 years ago with news of sunscreen from Hippo sweat. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Christopher. Thank you, Dr. Viney, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
You're welcome. All right, 5 years ago, you started talking about hippo sweat. You went to Africa to collect sweat from hippos. How exactly? Where are things on that front? Are there any updates or any background and update of the hippo sweat sunscreen research that you've been working on?
Sure. Background is that we've been interested in hippo sweat for, as you say, about 5 years now, because of its sunscreening abilities, as we've discovered its sun blocking abilities, and also because it does other things like act as an antiseptic, and it's an insect repellent, and it's so many things in one. The fun part about trying to do this research is, of course, getting samples. We did have access to a hippo here in the zoo at Fresno, which is about an hour's drive south. That animal, sadly, he was put to sleep a few years ago. So finding hippo sweat is a bit of a challenge. And I had this wonderful opportunity. It was 3 summers ago to go to Africa with a National Geographic crew, and they'd heard about some of the work that I'm interested in. Their man, Brady Barr, who likes hanging out amongst dangerous animals, thought he had a way to collect lots and lots of sweat, and so off we went, and we tried.
I have to ask, how do you collect sweat from a hippo?
How do you collect sweat from a hippo? Very, very carefully.
Yeah, aren't they short-sighted and a little... Or am I thinking of rhinos?
Rhinos.
Rhinos.
That's the way out of that one. I use hippos as a plural for hippos. That's an easy one. Rhinos are the short-sighted, absent-minded ones, bit like some professors. The hippos, they're just very dangerous. They are the most dangerous animals in Africa. They kill more people than, I believe, lions and crocodiles and snakes combined. Possibly mosquitoes are more dangerous because of malaria, but they really are dangerous, our hippos. And they don't like it if you get between them and their young, or between them and their place of refuge, which is the water. And so you have to be very, very careful. In the zoo, it was fairly easy because we simply had a means for putting the hippo in an enclosure where the floor had been hosed clean, let the hippo sweat a little bit, drip onto the floor, put the hippo outside, close the gate, and then you can pipette the sweat off what is hopefully otherwise a fairly clean floor and work on it. But in the wild, there's no nice clean floor. So the idea was to try, literally reach out and touch a hippo with a scraping device which Brady Barr had inside a hippo hide that he'd built. It looked like a fake hippopotamus, and he was crouched inside it and waiting for an unsuspecting hippo to go by. Of course, hippos are not unsuspecting. They're actually very clever animals. And so we spent, that must have been about 12 days, I think, and came away with no sweat samples, but a tremendous respect for all the good things that hippos are actually able to do and teach us.
So no sweat samples came out of that particular research trip.
No sweat from the trip, but a lot of knowledge, a lot of insight into just what Africa is like, what Zambia, fantastic country, wonderful people, and all sorts of interesting lessons from nature that are waiting there to be learned by people who can make the trip.
Yeah, so that kind of gets into the idea of the lessons from nature that we have to learn. So what was it initially about, why hippo sweat? Where does the inspiration come from to start looking for a solution to a problem in nature?
Well, in this case, it probably is proving, I think it was Edison right, that the inspiration comes with the perspiration. With hippo sweat, though, I should point out it's a misnomer because, we call it a sweat because it's exuded through the skin. It's more of a secretion than an excretion. So people who've got, either got any teenagers or people who are watching who've got teenage family members or friends, what do you worry about as a teenager in your skin? You've got zits, right? Yeah. What are zits? It's when you've got a blocked pore and what's called sebum. It's this very oily secretion in the skin which is blocking in the pore there, and it maybe gets a little infected, and that's how you get a zit. In the case of hippo sweat, it also is a sebaceous secretion. So it's a secretion. It's something that it's not trying to get rid of stuff. It's actually making it to use for a particular skincare purpose, I guess. Inspiration for nature. It's lateral thinking. It's putting yourself in the position of various creatures, plants, viruses, whatever's out there, and thinking, gosh, if I was that small or that big or living in this environment or had to put up with these predators or, subjected to this particular diet, what would I have to be really good at as a result of that? And then you think, well, gosh, maybe I'd like to be, as a person, as a researcher, I'd like to be good at those things too. And that's how you just keep an open mind. You have to be interested far outside the box and, a sense of adventure and a sense of humor.
I like that sense of adventure and sense of humor as well. With the hippo sweat, to follow that story, you didn't get any sweat from that particular trip to Zambia, but what have you found about the components of the sweat that actually allow it to block sunlight?
Right. So the research, my own background is a sort of as a physical materials scientist. So I'm particularly interested in which molecules are in there, but not from the synthesis point of view, more from the self-assembly point of view. Molecules in nature, they're all pre-programmed to do something. Often it's they're pre-programmed to self-assemble into some sort of a structure, so they organize by themselves into this material with particular properties. And for the hippo sweat, they organize into structures which are, if you like, periodic, at the same length scale that could interact very nicely with light. So it's a bit like having molecules building a very, very fine sort of Venetian blind system, and the slats are just at the right spacing to reflect the light back, and so the light doesn't get near the skin to cause damage.
So it's actually something that just is reflecting the light.
Yes, and there are other researchers in Japan. And actually, it's really nice, that you're not the only person to be working on as odd a topic as this, because there's some credibility of some other good scientists are also doing it. And the Japanese folks, they published a paper in Nature, as it happened, so good reputable place, round about the time that I first started in hippo sweat research, and they looked at the components the components have what's called conjugation in the molecules. It's a delocalization of electrons, so they're able to absorb light very effectively. And that's what allows them to act as a sunscreen. Okay, so sunscreens act by absorbing light in a particular way, and then they let it go at lower energies, and so it's not harmful in the way that ultraviolet would be. And a sunblock simply just throws up a barrier, so the sort of zinc oxide clown paint is the one we're most familiar with, but you can do it in other ways by using structural organization of the molecules as well as just simply making a barrier layer. That's what the Hippo sweat is teaching us. You can have structural barriers and indeed also chemical absorbing barriers. So it's really, from a sun screening point of view, it's also a sun blocker. It does both. I'm not sure, I don't know of any product on the shelf in the supermarket or the pharmacist which does both of those at the same time.
Right. So is the research leading us towards any application or any developments in terms of the sunscreens, sunblocks that I guess pharmaceutical companies are developing? Or
well, interestingly, the first little pot of money which I had for looking at this came from Unilever, and they did all kinds of products, including skincare, and it was nice of them to put some resources into it as kind of blue sky research as this is. I'm certain, given the skin, the sun screening and sun blocking ability, but also the insect repellent and the antiseptic properties of the stuff, that it would make a really good sort of 4-in-1 material. And I can imagine, somebody sitting in a hot tub, they want to protect themselves from the sun, they don't want the mosquitoes to bite them, they don't want to catch anything odd from the person next to them, possibly. They've can't be too careful, eh?
I maybe would choose to be covered in hippo sweat as opposed to, that combination of factors. Yes.
But in terms of, I'm not the entrepreneur who will go and make a test product for market, because I guess one of the reasons that I'm an educator and not working in an industrial environment is that rather than patent these things, I'd much rather get out there and knock on doors and sort of proselytize about the fun things you can do in science and get the next generation enthused about this. So I'd much rather talk, to a group of 4th graders about hippos and why they're cool and why we love hippo sweat, than sit on a patent and hope to get rich sometime in the future on it.
Well, they're everyone to their own interests and what they're good at. Exactly.
Oh, thank you.
So with the hippo sweat, how far do you go with the material science research in terms of going down the path? When do you say, oh, this is time for somebody else to take it over and turn it into actual application? I'm not interested in this anymore. It's time for me to work on something else.
Right. My own interest, I guess it's a failing of I have, is that I have sort of unlimited interest in too many things. So there's always going to be something else about it that's going to intrigue me. So it's really up to somebody else to come along and say, hey, I like what you've published, I like what you said. Would you like to work with me? Continue to share your ideas, but these other people will take the idea forward and do the scale up, do the market research, and do the implementation.
All right. For other things than hippo sweat is very interesting, but there are many other things in the world that have inspired research, tried to, led you on research adventures. What are some other things that you're interested in?
Well, the answer will probably change tomorrow if you talk to me, because every day something else comes along. But one really long-term interest is spider silk. And I've been messing around with spider silk. I suppose I've been ensnared by it myself for 20 years now, something like that. Spiders make material which, and I'm going to say this very, very emphatically, on average, are strong and stiff and tough, and these are different material properties. And spider silk is a rare example of a material that actually managed to optimize all these different mechanical properties, the strength and the stiffness and the toughness. So strength, what I mean there is how much load do you put on a given cross-section to break it? Stiffness is how easily does it stretch when I put a given load on that cross-section? Toughness, how much energy does it absorb on an impact in the process of failing? So these are all different ways of saying how difficult is it to break and to deform the material. Spider silks are superb at that. And I have over the years been trying to figure out everything from how the molecules self-assemble in the secretion, because inside the spider there's it's a protein solution, so it's like almost like Jello when you make Jello for a party. It's quite concentrated protein solution. So is silk in the gland, and yet it is so easily processable. And we discovered about 20 years ago now that it forms liquid crystalline phases, which explains something about its very low viscosity when it's being processed. We looked at the changes in self-assembly as the material goes through the spinning process. We've looked at molecular structure of the silk fibers. What is a persistent annoyance through this whole process is that ultimately it's the average properties which are good, but there's a tremendous range of properties. So, imagine you're an engineer, you're trying to build something that's reliable. You want to know exactly when something's going to break or fail. Yeah. And something that's statistically noisy, that's not so good, because you're limited in engineering by the weakest link, by the least strong, the least stiff, the least tough example in your 100 samples that you have. It's those which behave badly which will dictate how you can use the material in its entirety. And spider silk, on average, it's good, but there's some very badly behaved samples. And so the way nature gets around this is, of course, it makes silk into things like cocoons and webs, where the failure of just one strand isn't going to cause catastrophe. And it also tends to use silk on a once-off basis. So silk, you build a web if you're a spider, you catch flies for a day, you then eat the web, produce new silk, produce a new web for tomorrow, or repair the old web. Do
spiders eat the silk of their own webs?
They do.
Oh, I never knew
So
that.
fantastic recyclers. Little experiment you can do. This is a great time of year because the spiders in the fall, at least for people in this hemisphere here, we've got the fall. It's when spiders tend to come out of the basement and out of hiding and go reproduce and lay their eggs and get ready for winter. Now, if you see a spider in your basement or in your garage, try and tickle it. If you're squeamish, use a rolled-up newspaper or a garden rake or something, but tickle it. Let it fall off the ceiling and come down, and here it is dangling in front of you, right?
Yeah.
I love these webcams. This is fun. So here's a spider hanging, and you stare at it. You look right at it. Okay, and when you're looking at it, then tickle it again, and it'll forget that it came down from on the ceiling, and it'll start climbing up again. And while it's climbing, watch it very, very carefully. And it's actually rolling up the silk that it came down on, and it's stuffing that silk into its mouth parts, and it's chomping it up and it's eating it.
Really?
And it's recycling it. And they will do that with yesterday's web, so that they don't have to go and find, they don't have to find all that dietary protein to go and make an entirely new structure from scratch. And maybe the web didn't work. Maybe they didn't catch any flies. So they can actually use that protein. It's not a perpetual motion thing here. They do need food, but they can recycle their proteins efficiently. Some people have, let's see, they've radio-labeled the silk. They put like a tracer on it. And that silk that goes in at the front end gets chopped up into little pieces, digestively broken down into smaller molecular pieces, all the way down to amino acid, comes out the other end as new silk in about half an hour. It's very,
amazing.
Yeah.
It seems like a very efficient process that would come about. I mean, it makes sense to, in a limited resource environment, you don't know how often you're going to be able to get a protein-rich meal. Mm-hmm. How often are those insects going to come into your web? How often are you going to find your prey? So you have to make do with what you have. And so, it absolutely makes sense.
There's a lot of optimization there in nature as well, because for each spider, for its particular size and for its ability to catch and eat things, very little prey that's too small to bother with will just probably fly through the gaps in the web. Really large prey that could be dangerous to the spider will just smash a hole through the web and not get caught. And so the scale of the web is designed to catch food that's manageable. It's another nice little optimization that they managed.
Yeah. So with the spider silk, what kinds of what aspects of the different properties, the strength or the toughness and the elasticity, what are you looking at, and what are you looking for when you study their silk?
Okay. What I'm looking for are standard mechanical properties that are reproducible and that have decent values. And so I do these sort of tests by using very, very sensitive load cells. So you need something that can measure very small forces, because we work with single strands of silk. Silk is very strong, but it's also very thin. And so the forces needed to break or deform a single strand are actually small. We have to be able to scale to measure those. And then we do microscopy. So a combination of light microscopy, electron microscopy, and then some X-ray diffraction, all sort of techniques for probing the structure at different length scales. And this is where nature can, again, teach us something interesting. It's not just that the molecules self-assemble into these interesting structures, but they self-assemble into structure at different length scales. So what's happening at the nanoscale imparts some of the properties. What happens at the microscale imparts some of the other properties. And that's something which we can still learn a lot about in artificial materials, is how to get what's called multifunctional materials by controlling what happens at all these different length scales. So, you're not just a microscopist, you're not just a nanoscopist, or whatever you want to call it, that length scale. Right. You have to, or a macroscopist, you have to be kind of aware of detail at these various length scales, which is ultimately what makes materials such a fascinating subject, because it covers a broad range of ground in length scale as well as in chemistry and physics.
Right. So what you might see at the macroscopic scale, what might seem to make a material, a substance, strong or more elastic at a macroscopic scale might have completely different reasons, or there might be different structures below it at the nano scale.
That's right. So you see big crystals, which might, you might think, well, nice big crystal there, they're going to increase the stiffness of the material. But if you look at the crystals at higher and higher magnifications, you'll find that within them there are imperfections, and so the imperfections give them, or equip them with just the right amount of give to make the material tough and not brittle. And so, if all you were looking for were the size of crystals and not the detailed structure of them, you'd miss that aspect of how the stuff actually works.
Yeah. What would we do with synthetic spider silk if we figured out all the secrets to creating spider silk en masse? What would we do with it?
What would we do with it? We'd have fantastic Halloween parties.
That'd be great.
No, from a technological point of view, the answer I'll give you is probably different to what I might have given you, 10 years ago, because 10 years ago I was focusing on those absolute averages, that the average properties were good. But I probably spent the last 10 years wondering about what's wrong with it, because I think we sometimes rush in when we try to copy from nature. I'm a scientist in general, there's a tendency to say, yes, nature does this so well, let me copy this material and I can have something fantastic as well. Yes, but we have to realize why nature optimized something and what it's trying to achieve, because silk is not made by spiders or silkworms to last for 30 years, which an engineering structure might. Like I say, the web's designed to be eaten tomorrow, not, we don't dismantle our buildings on a daily basis.
Right.
So the sort of context in which we use materials would have to take that lesson from nature as well. So don't just take half a lesson, take the whole lesson. Take the lesson about where nature is using these things. And then realize also, that nature doesn't use silk under continuous load. Most engineering structures, let's think of the Golden Gate Bridge, for example. The Golden Gate Bridge has been there for 75 years now, something like that. Yeah. It's been holding up a deck and carrying loads, heavy loads for that length of time. Now, in terms of its raw strength, you might think you could do that with silk and make lighter cables so you can hold up a heavier deck on those towers because the cables themselves are contributing less weight. But then you study the silk over a period of time and you discover that it creeps. So, the strength in a short-term test is great. In a long-term test, it will creep. In other words, if we made the Golden Gate Bridge with silk stringers instead of steel cables, it would sag over a period of time. It would sag a long way, but eventually, the deck might end up near the water, at which point getting onto the deck could be a problem and getting off it. So silk wouldn't be a particularly good material. The other thing that silk is susceptible to is moisture, and spider dragline. If you wet it will contract. It actually super contracts. It will halve in its length. That's how much dragline will contract. So in fact, what's going to happen with the Golden Gate Bridge if you made those steel cables out of spider silk is it would creep during the day, and then when the fog rolls in and gets it wet, it would sort of twang back up again to some very much higher height than you wanted to start with, and this thing would be terribly unstable. So how would we use silk in situations where it's being not subjected to constant load? We don't have to worry about creep, and we don't have to worry about the weakest link.
Right.
And so where's this leading to? imagine if you had an aircraft luggage hold and you're trying to protect the aircraft from people who want to blow the airplane up.
That's in the news lately. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
Oh,
timely.
yeah. You know,
Okay.
So it's sort of more sort of a national security idea here that. If you want to prevent terrorism in the air, one thing you have to try and do is, well, hopefully catch people before they do anything bad. But it always seems to be a battle between how much explosive material people think they need to go and make something that's dangerous. So you've got to get better at detecting the explosive on the one hand, and you've got to get better at building the plane in a way that's going to take more explosive to bring it down. In the latter case, imagine if you could reinforce the luggage containers and perhaps the individual the containers that go into the hold or the walls of the hold itself, reinforce it with a lightweight material which for its weight is really, really good at taking high loads when it needs to once. And it's there, and it's ready, and it does it. And so it means that people have to bring a much bigger bomb than they think they have to bring on board, and bringing a much bigger bomb is much more likely to get caught on the ground before this thing goes airborne.
That's interesting. What about medical uses? Are there, do you think that there would be medical uses for wounds or dressings or those kinds?
Yes, the biomaterials folks are using silk, not so much exploiting its full strength, because actually you would never want to use a material in a human body in a totally sort of critical application where you've loaded up or done something to it almost at the maximum of its ability to stand what you've done to it. But the silk is being used because it's a nice scaffolding. It's got the right sort of surface to plant cells on, cells that would go and regenerate tissues. And I know there's some folks at Tufts University out there in Massachusetts who are doing some particularly good work in that area.
Yeah, there's some interesting suggestions from our chat room. I'm just watching our chat room go by. Somebody just suggested spider silk reinforced safety belts. So once again, that idea of maybe something that needs to take a load once.
That's
or
right.
Twice.
And you know, of course, with any sort of safety belt, you want to replace it once it's been stretched. You know, then of course you've taken it some distance towards its failure condition. So of course you replace it. Something that's comfortable, something that's lightweight, something that's not a pain to have to wear. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. So talking with you, I guess this a lot of people, they've heard the comparison between steel and spider silk. So a comparable amount of spider silk would be much stronger than that amount of steel. But in light of what you're saying, it seems as though the solution has to be the right one for the material. So steel is still the right solution for bridges, for the structural things that we need to construct.
Yes, and that's absolutely right. So it really just comes down to don't just take the lesson, but take the lesson in its context when you try to apply it in an engineering situation. The comparison between silk and steel, I have some misgivings about it because there is no such thing as typical steel. Steels, there's a huge range of historically, one of the reasons we use steel so much in construction is because you can, to some extent, independently tailor the strength versus the stiffness versus the toughness.
Right.
So you can change one and not necessarily have to sacrifice the others. And it's such a versatile material. That's why it's the foundation of materials and metallurgy courses. You learn an awful lot about steels because they are so versatile. Silk's the same. There's a tremendous range of silks. So if you're going to make the comparison, you need to probably say, which steel, which silk. When you say amount, do you mean by weight or do you mean by cross-sectional area?
Right. Be more specific, people.
Yeah, there you go.
I will shake my fist for specificity. Come on.
There's almost a pun lurking in there somewhere.
There's got to be, yeah.
Specificity, yes. Right, there you go.
Specificity.
Yeah.
From spider silk, I've also been reading up your adventures in materials science. There, you get in the spider silk is one area, the other area sweat and mucus. So we've got snail mucus and giraffe spit that are on the list of things that you like to gross kids out with. But what else? I'm sure you must be interested in these things for reasons other than just grossing kids out.
Well, isn't that good enough reason? it's a great conversation starter. You know, you walk into a room full of kids, and you know they're suspicious of you, and they want to know who is this guy, and he's got a funny accent, and you just say, well, I work on snot, and they you know you've got their attention.
Yes.
Why mucus? Really, it sits at the crossroads between engineering and biology. Engineers can learn useful lessons about lubricants from mucus. I'm just noticing that the sun's coming at a rather bad angle through my window. I'm going to back off a little bit to help the camera there. Engineers can learn from nature how to make good water-based lubricants. Bioengineers can learn something about the structure of mucus and how to study the structure, and then try to relate that to defective mucus in different parts of the human body. Let me give you some examples here. The mucus in our digestive system is what stands between us and digesting great big holes in ourselves.
Right.
So, you know, if your own digestive enzymes, your own stomach acids will eventually munch at the stomach lining and cause an ulcer if you don't have this mucus lining that's organized in just the right way to coat the surface at just the right thickness and to be replenished in just the right way. We need mucus for our survival in our digestive tract. And for, you know, you hear people talking about, you know, if you drink too much alcohol, it'll destroy the stomach lining. What's really saying is it breaks down the mucus, and then the chemistry that's in the stomach, including the alcohol itself, can start to damage the actual tissue of the stomach and of the digestive tract. So occasionally I'll say to kids, well, you know, you're absolutely full of it. And of course I mean mucus, right? So
You're full of mucus, yes.
Yeah, absolutely full of it, yeah. But it's good and very, very good and necessary stuff. The other place where we find it in profusion is in our respiratory system. And so it acts to trap crud, viruses, bacteria, particulate matter. And then we've got what are called ciliated cells on the inside of our airways. And those ciliated cells, they sort of beat in those cilia, those little hairs, they beat in a rhythmic way, and they transport the mucus up, and you know, you can get rid of it that way. And when that mechanism breaks down because the mucus is too thick or sticky or not organized at the right length scale, that's when it begins to accumulate. It pools in the lungs. Asthmatics suffer from that, and in the worst situations, people with cystic fibrosis suffer from a very bad case of that. Yeah. Understanding the structure of mucus and how to control the structure of mucus, how to break it down, is something that can ameliorate these at least the symptoms. It's not a cure, and I must, you know, people hear me say cure. I never say cure because, particularly for cystic fibrosis, of course, the cure is going to come from the geneticists. The other place where mucus is very important, and living here out in Merced, where we have a lot of farms and a lot of cattle, the farmers know a lot about mucus, and human beings know a lot about mucus because, of course, in mammalian reproduction, sperm cells, they've got to swim through a mucus layer to get to their target to fertilize, and if the mucus is too resistive, if it's too thick or sticky then right, the little guy runs out of gas before it can get to its target and fertilize. So you know, we as I've actually said to again school kids on Valentine's Day in their classroom, said, you know, we're all here having this conversation because of snot. And, you know, I play the engineer card, you know, it takes all the romance out of it. You know, we're just here because of mucus.
But from now on, we can say that snot is romantic.
Oh, it is. It's fantastic. Yeah.
Very great. For the mucus that we're discussing in terms of the, say, giraffe spit, or in the different locations, I guess the production of mucus has these different properties or different functions. Do you look at different animals and say, okay, what are they doing? Where are they producing mucus? Why are they producing mucus? Why would their mucus have different properties from another animal because of the different function?
To some extent. I've certainly looked at mucus from different sources. because, you find it in patients with bad colds. You find it in, as you've noted, on the tongues of giraffes. You find it on the outside of slugs. And so most of my experiments have been, where can I get reasonable amounts of the stuff in a reproducible form? Mm-hmm. I don't want to have to collect tiny little amounts and then worry about how contaminated, the contaminants outweigh the amount of useful material that I've collected. So it turns out that people with bad colds, giraffe tongues, and slugs are three places where you can find mucus in copious and useful amounts. And I used to live in Seattle, so slugs were no problem at all.
Yeah, and of the three, giraffe tongues and slugs are probably the healthier subjects to for you to collect.
Yes,
mucus from. Yeah,
it's better for me. Certainly. But the sort of comparison that I've tried to make there, and actually some years ago now published a study on that, was to look at what's called the domain structure in the mucus. Now, what's a domain? It's if you look at a metal under a microscope, if you polish it flat, you look at a metal under a microscope, you see lots of little crystals in there. Now, in a liquid crystal, which is what mucus actually is, it's a liquid crystal, meaning that it's a fluid, it's a liquid, but the molecules are organized by being oriented in some persistent form over some persistent direction. So let me see if I can do this in front of the camera. So now over here, the molecules are pointing this way. Over here, they're pointing, at some other angle. And so some distance over which that direction of pointing persists. And a region of aligned molecules is called a domain in liquid crystals. And one thing I was able to show was that the structure over which what's called the sort of domain structure, the length scale over which molecules organize in mucus, is correlated to the scale of the topography of the surface, which it's actually trying to lubricate in the natural setting. So if you've got a very rough surface, it's trying to coat, then you're going to have a bigger domain size than something where you've got to take many more kinks and bends to get across the hills and the valleys on a very small length scale.
That's fascinating. I don't know that anyone, aside from someone who looks at this stuff through a very high-powered microscope, would probably think of it in this crystalline manner, and the directionality and the functionality of it. It gives a whole new light to mucus.
I had a very brave student at the University of Oxford one year. It was a one-year project to measure what's called the phase diagram of mucus, or mucin. Mucin is the polymer. It's a it's a glycoprotein. Mm-hmm. So it's a protein backbone and sugar side chains, and that's mucin. And then you dissolve that in water to get mucus. And he actually measured, characterized a phase diagram where you see what sort of structures does it make as a function of concentration in water and as a function of temperature. And here's this big tough rugby playing guy, and he's actually working out the phase diagram of snot, and he did a really good job of it. We've all. Sorry, you had a question?
Oh no, I was just going to say, but you don't have to be a rugby player to work in snot. So.
No, not really. No, I've had many students over the years. One again, very successful, a young lady. This was in Scotland, where I worked at Heriot-Watt University for a while. And she was looking at why it is... Actually, I should back up here and say that there's a lot of information in mucus as well. I don't mean information that we can learn about structure and function, but slugs and snails use mucus to actually store and retrieve and read information. Let me illustrate this for you. Slugs, they change their gender. So any one slug, it can be a male slug, then it turns into a female slug, and can go back to being a male slug. They can do this. And what they do is they mate when they're both in their male phase. And so they collect the sperm from the other slug, and then they crawl away, become female, and fertilize themselves with the sperm that they collected from the other slug when they encountered a male. And so they have to find each other, of course, to indulge in this exchange of sperm. So when one slug intersects the trail of a second slug, that first slug can read in the trail which way the slug went that left that trail. And it can read how recently, so, is it worth actually following that trail or not? And it can even tell whether the slug that it wants to follow here is of the correct gender or not. So there's information writing and storage and retrieval at the molecular kind of length scale in this material. And so we've been interested for a while in how that works. And like I say, I had a young lady in Scotland who, was looking at the structure of trails. And also we were able to learn a little bit about how it is that a slug or snail that climbs up a window pane, if it climbs up a nice smooth window pane, and decides to go to sleep, and it's just climbed up a nice lubricating layer, why doesn't it just slide all the way back down again to the bottom while it's sleeping? So nice lubricant suddenly turns into super glue.
Right.
And then it lets go when it's ready to let go, and off it goes again. So learning something about the again structural changes in the mucus, all sorts of things, just wonderful stuff.
It's fascinating. Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. In the mucus that they're producing, what you're learning about the details of it, are people trying to reproduce certain properties of mucus in polymers to be able to create better lubricants or better superglues? Is that the direction that this is going?
This is where I'd like to see it go. Now, as I said earlier, I'm probably not the person to take it off all the way to market, but I'm learning the lessons. I write about them. I'll talk to anybody who's, anybody who's willing or perhaps even unwilling to listen. And, if somebody wants to take it and do that next step. I'm very, very happy to talk to them. In the meantime, I'm probably thinking about what else I can learn from it at the fundamental level.
Yeah, and the fundamental level is completely different from the application level or the development level.
Yep, but I enjoy the fun and I enjoy the mental, so that's why.
Oh, you've got a billion of these, don't you?
Sorry, can't help it. It's a disease.
For your own interests, the mucus, the spider silk, the sweat, these are all very. They're definitely like they seem not just biologically based, but very animal based. So we're looking at organisms or organismal mimicry. That's not the only area that we see materials research coming out of these days, is it?
No, you can see materials research. First of all, from plants, of course. Right. But that's still organismal at some level. But plants are a very rich source of things that we can do. I'm interested in plants that produce. It turns out the weeds in my yard produce latex. So, instead of weeding them out and throwing them away, I'm very interested in can we actually collect the latex and do something useful with these weeds? They grow anywhere. So why not grow them just grow them where we can't grow crops, harvest the polymer and do something with it. We can learn from plants in that sort of way. I've been working with Kids Science Challenge, which is run by it's a radio show on NPR, Pulse of the Planet. They've been doing Kids Science Challenge for a couple of years now, into their third year. And last year I was involved with one of their projects where the winning project, put forward by a kid in the fourth grade, was what can we learn from maple seeds? And so it wasn't just a materials question here, but a sort of a next level up sort of. So it's not just a material, but a sort of structural lesson. How does the entire device work, and what can we learn from nature? The shape of the thing, how it's designed to actually fall slowly. Can we harness that to arrest the fall of something that you might want to throw out of an airplane, for example, and bring down to Earth slowly and safely? At the other end of the length scale, you can go all the way down to a virus, and adenoviruses, they have these spikes on them, and that's interesting. You found the Kids Science Challenge. I did. Now my mind's working. What does it look like when you see a video of yourself on a video on a video? I have no idea how this is going to look. Curiosity. But down at that length scale of adenoviruses, the actual the spikes are interesting because they are compressively very strong and stiff. And if you wanted to make a compressively reinforcing polymer, let's say in some sort of brittle material, then maybe we can learn from adenovirus spikes.
Wow.
So viruses can maybe tell us something as well.
So inspiration can really come from a large number of places.
Yes.
Just wherever you look and find something that might where is nature solving these problems?
That's right. And like I said at the beginning, if I was, if I could do that, how would my life be improved? How could I improve other people's lives? How would that knowledge be useful? That was one of the cool things about doing Kids Science Challenge, because, it's open to 3rd through 6th grade, and they get to write in and talk about things that they would like to do based on what nature has, what they see in nature. And, there are some very interesting ideas there. And seeing life through the eyes of a child, or in other words, seeing it again for the first time, if you're an adult, that's.
Do you think kids come up with ideas that sometimes adults just overlook because we're looking at different aspects of the same things? We've seen things 100 times, and so it's not that novel. Are there really unique ideas that come out of this Kids Science Challenge?
Oh, absolutely, and just working with kids in general. So you have got some really good times ahead of you. I can assure you. Because, it's kids that, to some extent, their minds are less cluttered. Maybe they're not worried about whether they're going to get to the store in time before it closes, and whether they're going to finish tomorrow's grant proposal on time. They have the time to think and the luxury of the ability to think sometimes, they haven't been told, or they haven't been made to feel that it's uncool to think. They're a blank slate, and they can do things on that blank slate.
Yeah, and hopefully you can inspire enough to keep the kids from ever thinking that thinking is uncool.
Yeah, well, that's what I hope is one of the roles that I'm going to be dedicated to as long as I live.
Yeah, other things that you've been doing. There's a biomimicry educational summit, educators summit from the Biomimicry Institute. This summer. Could you tell me a little bit about the Biomimicry Institute? Is this an organization that, what does the organization do, and how are you involved?
The organization founded by Janine Benyus, who wrote a really sort of idea-altering book called simply Biomimicry, about 1995, somewhere on that sort of time scale. And then she founded this institute. It's in Montana, and what they do is they're a non-profit who exist to try and collect all the best design principles from nature, not just for materials, but for everything from how you might organize a transportation system in a society, to how you might make a more energy efficient building, to how you might reach better sort of decision-making trees, to materials and healthcare, all those lessons, and trying to take nature's best practice and document it so that people, if they have a design problem, they can go and look up, using their website, using their tools, look up ideas for solving the particular problem that they have. The conference that I went to in July, it was for educators, so it's enthusing and informing and learning oneself, from colleagues who are involved in the field. And like many other situations where I've been involved in giving presentations, the presentation that works for a group of 4th graders actually works quite well with minimal alteration, maybe change the vocabulary a little, but with minimal alteration for an audience of peers, of professors, of adults, because ultimately, if you care enough to be there, you will care about the same things that enthuse anybody who's prepared to think.
Right, and I think when you're giving a presentation, unless you're there to give very specific details about your research that involve complicated graphs and statistics, the majority of the time you really just want to get a message across, and you just want people to be interested in what you're saying. So
And you want to learn. And one of the most useful devices I found when I go to conferences, if I give a poster presentation, the one with biomimicry was an oral one, but if I give a poster presentation, my last panel is usually a blank sheet of paper, and I invite people to contribute their thoughts and their comments, because I never go to these things to tell people what the answers are. I go there to learn what the answers are.
Yeah. I think a lot of people could probably learn from your methods.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
I try.
From the Biomimicry Institute to the research that you do, and the work with kids and in education, what is the most just exciting thing or interesting thing about what you do that just drives you to keep going?
Boy, one thing.
Yeah, only one. No, there can be a few.
Well, I think it's a very fundamental thing about what civilization is about. And you can get people argue left and right, about how do evolution and how do humans differ from other animals, and what is civilization, and how would you recognize one if it snuck up behind you? I think the very simple definition of civilized, society, people, whatever, is that we educate our young. There is hope for the future because we educate our young. Our own future, depends on an educated generation following us. The hopes for, the human race depend on that education. Certainly in these troubled economic times, the universities are hurting, the schools are hurting. Well, who's probably being hurt the most by this? Ultimately, it's those kids who get who get very little exposure to, what a career in science, career in engineering can do for them, what they can do for their fellow humans if they go and learn some skills that allow them to improve the quality of life. All that comes down to education, enthusiasm, persistence in the learning environment. So if I can make a bit of a difference in there, then I'm doing something useful, I hope.
Well, I definitely think that you are.
Thank you.
We're at the end of our show right now, and I just want to thank you for joining me today. This has been a just fascinating tour through secretions and sweat and fluids.
Well, I try not to be secretive. Sorry.
That's right. Anyway, I do appreciate your time, and it's been a lot of fun, and appreciate your efforts in educating and also in discovering more about the natural world that we live in. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and thank you for making me learn about Skype. That's going to take me further as well. Thanks so much.
Oh, yeah, Skype's a great tool.
Yeah, thank you.
It'll totally help. You're welcome.
Cheers, and good luck.
Thank you. You too. And that was Dr. Christopher Viney. If you are interested in this topic of biomimicry and biomaterials, you can find out more information. He has a university website at UC Merced. The link will be posted on with the Dr. Kiki Science Hour episode 71 show notes. Additionally, you can check out the Biomimicry Institute. It's a place, there's a lot of information about biomimicry, what people are working on, different problems and different solutions that are going on. And once again, the link from earlier, there is the Kids Science Challenge. That's blog.kidssciencechallenge.com. And underneath Citizen Scientists, there's a link to this challenge for making floppy flyers. Get your kids, if you've got a kid who's just jonesing for a science project, maybe that's a good link for them, or maybe for the kid in you. There's always that. Additionally, we're going to be back here next week. This was a great topic and so much fun. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much for watching. Next week, I'm warning you right now, we're talking about math. I said it, math. We're going to talk about math. So just get ready. I don't think you're going to need any calculators or pencils or anything like that for next week. There will not be a test, but I just hope that you show up. Other episodes of Dr. Kiki Science Hour you can find at twit.tv/Kiki. And don't forget to subscribe. Subscribing to the show is kind of like voting. It's how you make a difference. And your vote, your subscription, it counts. You can find me online if you are interested in looking up other things that I do. Google me with the word Dr. Kiki. It's pretty easy. I have a Twitter account, Dr. Kiki, and there's also my blog and Facebook and all those other things. But you can pretty much find it all through Google. I will be here later tonight, every Thursday, 7:30 p.m. This Week in Science. It's coming up 7:30 p.m. Pacific time tonight. And this weekend, for those of you who are in the Bay Area, I will be at the Bay Area's Wonderfest. TWIS is doing a live show at 3:30 p.m. on Sunday in Berkeley. So check out wonderfest.org to find out where it exactly is and come say hi. Love to see you out there. That's it for the show. I will see you next week. Thanks once again for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. And if nothing else, maybe you learned something that made your world a whole lot more interesting. A remix. Material world. Material. Material world.